NG Poland and JS Poland conferences are coming soon. This year promises to be exceptional. We will see the Angular team on the stage. We will see Quick Creator, Solid JS Creator, experts from Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Cisco, Auth0 and many more. Join an amazing group of developers like you today. Let's come together to celebrate Angular and JavaScript. Go to ngpoland.pl and sign up now. What's up everyone, this is Dariusz Kalbarczyk, co-founder of AMG Poland, JS Poland, AngularMaster.dev and WorkshopFest.dev. Welcome back to the Angular Master Podcast. Today, together with Shai Reznik, who is an excellent speaker, trainer, founder and CEO at HighRes.io and testangular.com, we will tell you how to add test to an Angular application in an easy way. Hi Shai, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Thank you. For those who don't know you yet, please tell us about yourself.
So I was born in 1983 to a lovely family. And no, I'm kidding. So I'm Shai Reznik. I'm the founder of HighRes.io, where I focus on teaching web development in an innovative and fun way. Mainly focusing on testing, or what I call test-effective development, which aims to reduce the amount of waste development teams have in each sprint by 20-30% by teaching them cost-effective techniques on how to test their code. So I focus on that, and also innovative new web technologies like Quick and what we will do as web developers in 2 to 3 years time. So I'm passionate about teaching, about web development, about innovation, creating tools, open source, all this type of things, and entertainment. So I like to entertain people and to take boring topics and make them more interesting and such. So this is me in a nutshell.
That sounds amazing.
And also forgot to mention that I have testangular.com, which is my Angular testing focused website, where you can check out my Angular testing courses, see demos, and also get for you or your team each of the bundles and such. So that's where all of the magic happens. So yeah.
So tests are boring?
Yes.
Yes and no.
A lot of things in programming, a lot of topics are boring most of the time, and it depends on how you learn them. I used to learn computer science when I was in high school. It was in my major or something like that, and that was super boring to me. And I think I had teachers who weren't too passionate about the topic. So when you ask them what's an algorithm, for example, they answered with, it's an algorithm, something like that, right? So I really disliked the topic, and I found it super boring, and only rediscovered it after a couple of years, and found that I really am passionate about it, because I found a different way to learn it. So I think the way you learn stuff is impacting the way, how much you're passionate about the topic or not. And so testing can be super boring and can be super annoying if you maybe learning in a certain way, and also if you don't really understand what's the point behind it. So I think these two things are good things to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So Why tests are important?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Testing is something that everybody knows that or hears that they need to add, but most of us don't do it, or just delete the spec file when you generate a component or something like that. Or just say to yourself, okay, tomorrow I will do it and tomorrow never comes, or, next sprint we'll do it. Now, for a lot of years, I thought about, or I advocated for, edit tests, but just saying, yeah, it's important. Like I was taught, it's important to do it. It's like, but it's something that needs to be done. But in recent years, I started to actually measure stuff. So instead of just saying, hey, you need to do it, because the concept makes sense. Everything a robot can do, it should do instead of us, right?
Exactly.
Or else we won't have any automation in the world, right? Think about like car manufacturing. If we needed to assemble the car by hand, we won't have any advancement in this field, right? So the same goes for software. If a robot can check repetitively your program that you just wrote, it should do it and not you, because you should focus your time on more creative stuff. But the deal is, or the problem is that it takes time to learn how to master it, and also to know what is effective, meaning what test should I write and what shouldn't I write, or like I shouldn't write, and what should I focus on to bring the most confidence and efficiency. And that's the idea behind test effective development, is the combination between confidence and efficiency, not just what brings me the most confidence, because then I will just like waste my time on fighting with, slow tests, or like the tests that keep on breaking. So I started like measuring the impact of tests in companies, and I realized that when you add the right combination of tests and testing techniques into the culture of the company and the development teams, you can actually reduce the amount of unexpected bug fixing time or tasks by 20 to 30% each sprint. Now think about a large company with several development teams. If you can reduce their time waste by 20 to 30%, think about how much money it saves your company to do that. Because if you don't have any automation, if you rely only on one QA person to check the entire validity of the entire team, and they have like, only that much time to do it, once, one day each sprint or something like that, or you have to wait until you push that. And worst case is that you don't have, even worse, if you don't have the QA person, and you just like rely on manually testing stuff, by hand, probably miss stuff. And then on the next sprint, you get this like tap on the shoulder. Hey, production is down. So stop what you're doing and go fix that. And then you find yourself, okay, I invested all this time to plan the sprint with this type of tests. I'm under pressure because I'm obligated to finish them. Now I need to stop and lose focus and lose context of what I was doing to go and try and debug this weird bug in production that I introduced like last week, but only now people saw it. Or even worse, like I'm getting a call in like 3 a.m. because I pushed like some code that until the build time was over, it only like got introduced in the night, and now we need to fix that and all that stuff. Okay. That creates lots of waste, fixing bugs is unmeaningful work. It's not meaningful work. It's not something that you actually, benefits the client or the end user, because bugs shouldn't be there in the first place. And it also creates lots of stress and, frustration in developers themselves, because they need to, keep constantly be on the alert of, I'm not sure 100% that what I just didn't break anything, and keep being in this constant state of stress of like, when will I get this, call or tap on the shoulder or like, Slack message or whatever, telling me to stop what I'm doing and go and fix something unrelated to what I'm doing now. So if you can reduce this, you cannot probably eliminate it by 100% because we're still human, we still do mistakes. But if you can introduce enough automation that catches stuff, you can reduce the waste in your development test, save a lot of money for the company. It could be like, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million, depending on the size of the teams, and a year, right? And also get to a place where your company can go from, releasing once every 2 weeks or once a month into releasing daily multiple times. It opens the gate towards continuous delivery, which is one of the most important factors in a company growth rate. Because, companies like, for example, I did some case studies about companies like Wix and Monday and like other fast growing companies who used automation and testing automation in order to, move to continuous delivery, in order to iterate fast on improvements and move faster and grow faster, because they didn't have to rely on humans to manually, do stuff, and could grow much faster. So that's the why testing, I feel, is super important. And the how to do it is also super important, because if you do it the wrong way, or if you try or start the wrong way, then it could lead to, adoption problems, and you can give up on this and all that stuff. So that's what I feel that, in Angular specifically, there are a couple of problems that hurt the adoption, and they're actually in the documentation itself. So that's why I feel it's important to talk about it and, share it with the world, to let them know which mistakes to avoid.
You're listening, Angular Master Podcast. Listen, code, repeat. Everything you need to know to become an Angular super developer.
So let's talk about Angular. Why testing Angular is difficult or is easy?
If you go and read the documentation and you try to learn that, or even the most, if you go on YouTube or learn the most, common sense or common wisdom, let's say, about testing Angular, you will see the same reiteration of ideas around what you should test. For example, you will see a lot that you need to test the DOM, meaning compile the component and trigger events and, test the outcome of those events. You will see a lot of when you, for example, search how to test observables. If you have like observable, even if you go to the documentation again for Angular, you will see that even they suggest and recommends using marble testing for testing observables. And these are just two of, examples, which if you follow these examples blindly, and most of people who don't have experience with the downsides of these, things, are setting themselves up for a failure. That's what I saw over and over again. Because, and we'll talk more about why, but these things and these recommendations leads to frustration. And then it leads to, the belief that testing is too difficult in Angular. It's not worth it. And we should just avoid it and just focus on, end-to-end test or QA. They will test it and we'll just and we fall back to the old habits of testing in the browser manually and such. So, which makes us testers, right? I always say it. People say, okay, I don't write tests. I don't test my code because I don't believe in it. And I always tell them back, you do test your code, you just doing it inefficiently, okay? Because you're doing it in the browser manually and not having a robot doing it for you. So you are doing it, because if you don't test it at all, how can you call yourself a professional developer without checking that your work is valid before pushing it to Git or to the repo or to GitHub or to production eventually, right? You must test it somehow before you push it, or else I don't think you can call yourself a professional, any profession, right? You cannot call yourself a pro if you cannot stand behind your work. If you're a plumber and you do some work and you don't check that the water goes from one end to the other, you're not a professional plumber, right? So that's the way I feel about testing as well. And the idea is behind it is confidence. I do what I do for confidence. I teach because I want to learn better also, and I want more confidence in my knowledge about what I'm doing. And also I test and I teach about testing because I care about the confidence it gives us as developers to know that we didn't break anything. And I don't like the constant state of stress. So I try to reduce it with what I'm doing, with the tools I'm creating and with the material I'm teaching. So now let's talk about what are the two examples that I gave, DOM testing and marble testing. Okay, so DOM testing, like I said, DOM testing is when you compile the component and you trigger events on the template or the HTML or the compiled component and check the results. Now, there are a couple of problems. In Angular specifically, it results in slower tests. Okay, that's one problem. In another problem of it, which is not Angular specific, is that it increased the complexity of your environment, meaning depending on which component you compile, if you compile, let's say, a parent component or a grandparent, which has lots of child components and grandchild and grandchildren and such, if you're high up on the tree, you increase the complexity of your tests, because now you don't only need to worry about that specific component, you also need to worry about all of its child components and their child components. So you need to now use techniques like mocking the child components and figuring out how to test the interaction between them, and also symmetrically figure out how to test their interaction, like the child component's interaction with your component on their tests and such. And most of the time, when people begin with Angular, they don't see even the technique to mock or to fake the child components. So they just try to compile the root component or something like that. And they encounter so many errors of these weird services that are not being imported or this weird third party components for like Angular material or like other stuff. And the recommendation is to use like a shared module which you import into your spec file or test bed, and that introduces more slowness and more problems because now you need to import all of its dependencies. So it creates lots of friction unnecessarily where you just wanted to test a simple interaction between your components. So you wanted to test the logic of your component. Now, so that's one problem that people encounter when they start testing the DOM. Now, if a company has a requirement that you must have tests, people figure out a way. So I did some research about how people are testing their code in enterprise level applications. I talked with Narwhal team. I talk with other companies that work with enterprise application. I did research I know what I do with my, clients, but I want to see what others are doing as well. And everybody is falling back to the same technique, basically. They are using what I call class testing, meaning you take the component class and you instantiate it and you just test its method without compiling the DOM. Now you can say, okay, but I'm losing the confidence between the template and the class, right? I don't know if, I wired things correctly. If I even added the event listener from the button to the method, right? Yes, you are losing that confidence, but you are gaining efficiency. And that's the balance between like the confidence and efficiency. You're gaining efficiency by not running I did an experiment where I took 10,000 tests and ran them with DOM tests versus class tests. I think it was 10,000 or 1,000. I don't remember, like either 1,000 or 10,000, but it was like a significant amount. And it was like a super simple test. It wasn't like just like creating a component and checking something on it, right? Not even with, lots of, logic and loops and all that stuff. And to know how much time, so the DOM testing took 1 minute to run, like 1,000 or like the 10,000 tests. Anyway, the amount of tests. So, Derek, do you know how much time the class testing took in terms of running compared to 1 minute? So, because in class testing, you don't need to compile the DOM, right? You just create a new class. So it took 1 second. So times 60, okay? That's the efficiency you get by using this technique. Now, you say, okay, but there are times that you might want to test the DOM. And what I say about that is that you might want to do it only for reusable components. Why? Because usually they are the leaves of your tree. You don't need to worry about interacting with child components. And they are more crucial because they are being used at multiple places. And if you have a bug there, you affect a lot of places in your code or in your application. So you want to gain the most confidence. And there are usually less of them, and they don't introduce anyway the child component problem and the importing of other third-party libraries and lots of, let's say, dependent imports and all that stuff. So you want to reduce it to just testing it in reusable components. Now, if you're using something like Storybook, you can use it with Cypress, which will be even more fun to test. So that's my recommendation. Now, I'm still doing the research on it. I know that the Angular team are, trying to figure out a way now to make it much faster and much better. I started working on a tool back in, 2018 about how to make it much easier to, write tests for and to test like root components. But I stopped because the efficiency wasn't, good enough. But now with the advancements, now with changes that the Angular team are planning for, testbed, I might, start and go back to, implementing this tool or like releasing the tool that I started working on. And my recommendation might change. If I can get to the same efficiency level, like one second of running like, so many tests, then it will be a good recommendation. But again, I'm all about test effective development, which is like, okay, what's the balance? Okay, I'm losing the confidence, but what am I gaining? I'm gaining enough efficiency, then the confidence, how much confidence am I losing, and is it worth it? And if it is, then I'm recommending that. Okay, but it keeps changing, keep evolving, and I keep researching it to know what's the latest, advancement. So that's why I'm saying, like, follow what I'm doing on Twitter or like, on testangular.com, something like that. And I keep like updating. I have like a new live stream that I do every week, and I'm going to do it for Test Effective specifically to share like, the research and all that stuff and to interview people. So again, that's one way to keep updated about the research. But as of now, that's what I'm recommending. Don't go for the default that you see in the Angular documentation about DOM testing. So that's DOM testing versus class testing. Now, the second recommendation that I talked about was marble testing. First of all, it was super cryptic to me to understand what is going on in marble test, like trying to read the syntax, because it wasn't intuitive to me at first when I tried to understand, like, so what are those symbols mean? And then what you do, you go to Google and try to Google it. And then you get to some blog post. And then you try the examples on the blog post. And then you realize that the blog post is talking about one library of marble testing, but you are actually using a different library of marble testing. For example, you have RX marbles, I think, and you have like, which comes from, and you have like the ArcJS marbles, like coming like the original from ArcJS, and you have Jasmine marbles, which was created by the NGRX team, which has a slightly different syntax.
So it makes mess.
Yeah, and has no documentation, by the way. So you need to read the source code in order to understand what is the specific difference. And also then, once you understand it, you try to play with like, wait, so I need to add here a dash to make it work because it doesn't work and the error message doesn't tell you why. And, all of this just to test that the observable does what it needs to do. And I just couldn't handle it. So for a lot of, for a long time, I just, stuck with like just subscribing to the observable and adding like, the expectation inside of the subscribe or something like that, just to see that I'm getting, because most of the tests are simple. Hey, I'm subscribing. This is the value I expect to get. Okay. Sometimes you get into a more difficult situation or complicated situation where you want to, have time-based operations. For example, after 3 seconds, you want to do something and you want to, maybe debounce or maybe cancel, maybe switch map, or maybe, all that stuff. And then you actually need to control the time. But even then, marble testing still is the more complicated solution, both to learn, the learning curve is steep, and also to maintain, or for others, like others reading your test, if they're not super experts on it, it takes them a while to understand what is happening in the test. So what I decided to do is I had to find a way to solve it, for my tests, and also to solve it for because I'm teaching about Angular testing, and I want to teach about, people kept asking me for how do I test complicated observables. This is the hardest thing about Angular testing, which is not Angular related, it's RxJS. But if you go to the documentation, you will see that the recommendation is to use Jasmine Marbles, which has no documentation, okay? But this is the recommended way by the Angular doc. So I think this is, again, contributing to the lack of adoption of testing, because people are seeing this, they're trying, okay, let's do this marble thing. Oh, what the hell is that? Okay, no, thank you. Okay, I'm not going to test my observer. I'm just going to subscribe here, or I'm just going to give up altogether about testing because it's too complicated. So what I did is I started thinking about, first I tried to look at other, solutions in JavaScript. I couldn't find any solutions to testing observables other than Marble testing. And then I thought about, wait, there are other languages that use Rx, like reactive extensions. For example, like .NET or Java, they have Rx Java. So I started reading books about Rx Java and .NET just to see how they test their code. And I got into Rx Java book, and they had a section about testing, and they had an idea there called subscriber spy, where you pass a subscriber that just collects all the values that it gets, from the observable. And then you can spy on it, or interrogate it, or get the values in the expectation. And I thought, that's such a simple idea, and it's not implemented. Sometimes you encounter an idea which is too simple, and you think to yourself, okay, probably, somebody already did it because it's so simple. But then I searched for it in JavaScript, and there wasn't anything like that. So I created a library called Observer Spy, and I just, I credited, the Rx Java book, where the idea came from, and just wrote a JavaScript version of this idea. And other people joined the GitHubs, Thomas Burleson and others, and Younes, and to suggest their ideas on how to simplify it, and added even simplify the API more, where you just use one function called subscribe spy to, you give it an observable, and you get an observer spy from it. And then you can just, ask it, okay, give me your values, or did you get an error, or what was the order of the values that you received? And that's it. You can just write expectation, and your test become flat and readable. So super, super simple, and it simplifies how you write your, observable test or ArcGIS test by a lot. Now, for the more complicated examples, for example, where you need to control time, I had a library which I created way before called AutoSpies. So, for example, if you think about, let's take a practical example. Let's say you have a component with a product list, okay? And it depends on a product service where you fetch all the products. And it's an observable because you're using Angular, and for some reason, Angular loves, observables for fetching data. So you are depending on that, okay? And now for, you have like a complicated logic there with like switch map or like with like a delay and all that stuff, and you want to test that. Because if it just was about, fetching the observable products, it was an easy, easy one. So if you're using AutoSpice, you can cater both to or you can deal with both scenarios, the easy one and the more complicated one. The easy one is you get, let's say you have get products as the method on the product service, which returns an observable. Because you're typing the return type, AutoSpice knows how to create the helper methods that allows you to configure the returning observable, meaning you can do like, product service spy dot get products dot, if you're using, for example, Jasmine, dot end dot next with, and then you can provide this like array of products. And this will create an observable which returns or emits this array of products. And you can do it in one line without complicating stuff. And this is the simple scenario of just returning a value from an observable, okay, that is on your dependent service. Now, if you want the more complicated example where you need to configure stuff, AutoSpice has methods for that as well. You can create like, an observable which has like a delay, like the first item comes with a delay of like, 200 milliseconds. The second item comes with a delay of, or comes immediately. And the third one is with a delay of 3 seconds, and then it completes. Okay, you can define all of that in AutoSpice and just return this observable. And this solves the second problem, because if you think about marble testing, what marble testing allows you to do is to define this observable streams where you define how many frames are being or are how many frames are between each value of the observable stream. Okay, so for example, the first value, and then 2 frames, and then the second value, and then 3 frames, and then the third value, and such. And you can define like if it's completes or if it errors or stuff like that. But you do all that using this sign language that is specific for marble testing. Okay. Now, deciding how many frames are passing between the values where you don't really need it, okay? Those are what I call implementation details, okay? Like knowing how many exact frames are passing between the second value and the third value, like if it's 3 or 4, and if you don't know it, your test fails. This is what adding friction to your test. And what I suggest, or what I'm saying, is that you don't really want to focus on that in your test. And in order to make things simpler, you want to think about your test as a black box, meaning if I'm subscribing to my observable, let's say using, ObserverSpy, if enough time passes by passing the time using, let's say, fake async or something like that by Angular, if enough time passes, then I want to check that the result is what I'm expecting it to be. For example, I got 2 values and this is their order. Or I got just 1 value, or I got an error, or I got, some kind of an outcome. I don't care about how much time was passing between each value, because this is an implementation detail. Because in real life, the user will, just wait 2 seconds and then we'll see the result. Okay. Now, that's what I care about in my test. In my logic, of course, I have logic that, handles different type of, times or different type of scenarios and all that stuff. But in my test, I just want to set up the spies, pass enough time, and check the result. Okay. Now, this you can do with AutoSpies as well. So the combination of AutoSpies and ObserverSpy together removes the need for marble testing entirely. So you don't really need to use or to know about marble testing if you use the combination of AutoSpies and ObserverSpies, which are free and open source, and you can use it today. So this is, in a nutshell. Now, testing observables, because the nature of observables is their nature is more complicated. There are techniques that are developed, on how to test them in a way that makes sense, because especially if you have large or long observable chains where you add more operators, you want a specific technique to test them in a way that makes them the test easier to read and easier to maintain and such. And this is a different topic, but this is because of the nature of observables, which are harder to test, because ArcGIS is a low-level tool, which is being used a lot in Angular. And I believe that, the direction moving forward, I hope that they will take it into a more simpler way of doing reactivity. And ArcGIS will be used only for the more complicated scenarios that you really, really need the power of, RX for those scenarios. But for the most simple scenarios, or the most common ones, you won't need ArcGIS. But that's speculation. That's part of what the team talked about in NGConf, in their keynote, in the other talks, that are thinking about maybe a simpler future for reactivity in Angular, which is, gives us hope. But if you need to test your more complicated observable chain, especially in NGRX effects, for example, where you have multiple operators and they're more complicated, the combination of AutoSpies and ObserverSpies and the techniques that I'm teaching in my courses about advanced observable testing or NGRX testing will give you the complete combination of how to do it in a maintainable and test effective way. So to sum it up, the 2 mistakes that I talked about are using DOM testing for all of your components. I think this is a mistake, especially in the beginning. When you don't have any knowledge about testing, starting with DOM testing, it could lead to a lot of frustration, a lot of running after tests and fixing them. And, this can discourage you from writing your tests. So what I suggest is start with class testing. Get good at class testing. This is the simpler way to test and will give you, most of the benefit, because most of your logic is in the classes of your components and services. And use DOM testing just for the reusable components and practice that. Again, until I will find a more efficient way, this is my recommendation. And it will allow you to, reduce the learning curve, okay, or to make it easier. And the second one is don't use marble testing, use ObserverSpy and AutoSpy together in order to achieve the same result with much simpler and easier to maintain syntax. Okay, and this will make your Angular testing much easier and much easier to write and much easier to adopt.
The next question is, what advice do you have for those who are starting a new project versus those who want to add tests to an existing large project?
New projects is the easier way, right? Because you're starting from scratch, and I suggest that sooner you can start with, writing in TDD, meaning once you are over the POC period, okay, or we are done with that, you know that this is the direction you want to go with. Start getting good at writing tests so you can switch the order and write the test first. And I teach a very simple technique on how to do it. And that way you get all the benefits of actually writing the test and not leaving it as the last thing you do on the sprint, which you most of the time never get to because there are always unexpected things and you're always like pushing it to the last moment and you don't get to even write the test. So I suggest the sooner you can add TDD, the test-driven development technique, when you write the test before you write the code, the better. So that this is for new projects. The recommendation for existing projects is to do it in a way that is gradual, meaning start with the low-hanging fruit first. The low-hanging fruit in testing are pure functions, are simple services. These are the best places to start adding tests to, which don't require a lot of setup, knowledge, and such. Because the crucial thing about testing is to adopt it as a habit and to get good at the syntax, being familiar with the syntax, with the technique of what do I even test, what are the parts of the test, and all that stuff. So choosing the simplest things to write tests for is the best approach that I found, and to start adopting it. Because then when you get to the more difficult parts, you don't have, you already have the knowledge or the basic knowledge of how to write the test. So you don't need to, deal with both things. You can deal with just trying to find a way to, refactor the complicated code in order to test it, or, how to approach it, and, get advice from people like me or people like other people who teach about testing, about how to approach the difficult scenario. But you don't need to deal with the complexity of, I don't know how to even write tests. So I don't know even how to approach this difficult scenario and write a test for it. So I'm just giving up on the entire things whatsoever or altogether. So that's how to start with. Okay. And what I suggest is not to try and stop develop. It's not actually realistic to stop development and, add a bunch of tests, because, you can do it for a month without actually benefiting the end user. So gradually adding tasks, in each sprint, start with one service, then introduce adding to 5 services and adding to more code, and adding code coverage as a tool to let you know how your progression or testing progression is going. Meaning are you stuck in the place? Are you adding more stuff? So code coverage is a way to know which lines of code are being executed by tests. It's not a silver bullet. It won't give you 100% confidence that all of the scenarios are tested. Reaching 100% code coverage is not like a realistic goal. Oftentimes it leads to unnecessary tests. But as a tool for knowing if some code is not covered at all with tests, it's a good tool to know that you didn't really thought about, or nobody has written a test for this section of the code. And it's a good indication that you need to cover it with tests. And that's what code coverage is good for. So using that as a tool for okay, we have no tests in our project. We want to add code coverage to see that we don't have any tests, 0%. Now we do an effort of covering all the pure functions, let's say, with tests, and then we measure it. So we now add let's say 5% of our code covered with tests. Now we want to set this 5% as a minimum, meaning that if we go below 5%, it will fail the tests and it will fail the build will fail. And that way we know that we're not adding more code without tests, at least. So each time we get into this benchmark, each end of the sprint, we measure how much code coverage and raise the bar of the minimum. And that way we force ourselves to take it more seriously. And that's where TDD comes into play. So another recommendation, once you get good at, figuring out the basics of testing, you want to start writing the tests for your bugs in a TDD way. Okay. So meaning you have a bug that you need to fix, an unexpected bug. Instead of just fixing it and then writing tests, first write a test that proves that the bug exists. The test will fail because the bug exists. Then you fix the bug, you make the test pass, and just added a regression test, meaning you won't have any regression about this or from this bug reappearing. If it will reappear, if somebody will change the logic again in the future, your test will fail and you won't fail production. This bug won't return, okay, because you have a test that covers it. And this is the automation. This is the robot that saves you from, waking up in the night and fixing production and such. So that's one recommendation on how to, add it to existing projects. Plus, you need to really think about adding smoke tests for your projects. But this is a whole different topic that I teach about and also talk about. So that's another recommendation to reduce, to get to zero critical bugs in your application, and not just because you cannot get to zero bugs, right? You will have bugs, but you want to get to, or to aspire to get to zero critical bugs, meaning that the buy button works, that the login and registration works, all the critical parts in your app works no matter what you're doing. If you did a refactoring or you switch state management solutions, you didn't mess up the critical parts of your app. And for this, you must use smoke tests, like the developer written smoke tests, and not just QA. But that's a whole different topic. But anyway, this is my recommendation.
Can you reveal what we can expect at your presentation at NG Poland?
So I'm going to talk about some of the stuff I mentioned today, which regarding TDD. Like I said, that this is a habit you want to adopt as early as possible. But from the years of teaching it, I saw that people are starting from the wrong step when they try to implement it. And what I want to reveal, I'm going to reveal one of the best techniques that I teach about that, I used to charge a lot to teach about, but I'm going to just teach it just to share the knowledge because I want more people to gain the benefit from adopting this habit sooner. So I'm just going to reveal it, but I'm going to do it in a way that is unusual and you never seen before. Like you never saw this way. It's going to be crazy and fun and interactive. And so I'm not going to reveal like everything now because I want to be a surprise for the attendees. But it's going to be fun and educational.
My last question for today's podcast. 2 books you would recommend to our listeners. One technical and one non-technical.
A good book that I always recommend is Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Tests. I think it's a good book because it's really thorough and it talks about like the theory behind and also give practical examples and talks about how testing can be used as a code design tool, which is an interesting thing to think about, and how mocks and all that stuff. It was written by the guys who actually came up with the term mock objects. Okay, they were the first one who used it. So that's a great book to maybe shift your thinking about tests as not only a confidence tool but also a code design tool, which is great. The second book I would recommend, a non-technical one, is a book called Why We Sleep. And it's a book that I'm not reading books that much. I'm more of a listener to audiobooks. And it starts by saying, if you fall asleep during this book, it's okay, because this is the whole point of the book, to teach you that, sleep is one of the most important things in your life. And it shows you it's like a 20 years study of the impacts of sleep and lack of sleep about your brain and diseases and concentration and memory, all that stuff, and efficiency, like during the day to day. So before I read this book, I was sleeping 5 hours on average or 4 hours at night because I want to make use of all the waking, the time I'm awake, and not to waste life. But after listening to this book, I started sleeping 6, 7, 8. I'm trying to do it because I see the benefits. I get much more done in a day when I sleep 8 hours than when I sleep 5 hours. I'm not falling asleep on the computer and all that stuff. So it's a good book. It's a long one, but if you listen to it on 2x speed, it could be a life-changing book. And another recommendation for a non-technical book, which I just got reminded of, is Nonviolent Communication, which is a great book for all type of, your relationships, whether you're a parent with your kids, you have a spouse, business partners, any type of relationship. That's a great book to read and to see how to communicate in a way that is more understanding and create less conflicts and bring people more together. Actually, as a parent, it helped me a lot with my kids of not getting into arguments unnecessarily and not imposing myself and all that stuff on them, and much more getting them to do the necessary stuff for them without forcing them to do it. So that's a great hack to my life. So I want to recommend it as well.
Shai, thank you for participating in today's podcast. You gave us a lot of interesting information. I'm looking forward to our meeting in Warsaw at this year's NG Poland and JS Poland conferences.
Thanks, sir. Thank you for having me, and can't wait to see you soon in person after all these years.
Yeah, exactly. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Finally, please subscribe to our podcast, leave a like and a comment to help us continue to grow.